nationalist movement is going to be working hard to get every one of us a referendum legislation passed in the next session. So I would ask that you do whatever you can, whether you believe on leave or remain. I would ask that you do whatever you can to help us in that endeavor. I want to thank you for your indulgence tonight on a topic that is hopefully something that, I cannot cover Brexit, nor can I cover Texas all in one thing, but I would hope that it would encourage you to go out, do your own research, understand what that issue is, and bring those lessons home to Texas. Thank you all very much. Okay, I was told that we're doing some Q&A, probably lots of Q and lots of A, but it's however you guys want to do it. Questions? Anyone? See? There's always one in every crowd. Yes, Mr. Wallace?
At the convention, for those of people that didn't get to attend, it was winding down when we were talking about articles including Texas independence. The chairman of the state party was at the podium, and it looked like somebody hit him in the face with a board when we voice voted no.
Right.
About discontinuing the discussion.
Well, you have to understand that the history that we have had on this issue with the state Republican Party has been one that has been dangerous. I mean, from their standpoint, they view us as, I guess you would call it radical insurgents, right? Maybe that's the term. But even when Steve Munisteri was the chairman of the RPT, one of the biggest challenges there was we had a rub because he and I appeared on a radio show together, both being interviewed at the same time, and he made a significant misstatement or an outright lie. I don't know which one it was, and I called him on it, and I held his feet to the fire. From that time on, he's had nothing to do with us. But the narrative that they had about this issue of Texas independence was quite simple. They said that we don't exist inside the Republican Party. That was what they were telling people. People like us do not exist inside the Republican Party. So we showed them 2009, the Research 2000 poll that showed 50% of Republicans at that time believed that Texas would be better off as an independent nation. Then the Reuters poll in 2014 that showed that 54% of Republicans believed it. And so honestly, we went to the convention and went through the petition process to essentially prove a point that there is definitely not just a small number of people inside the Republican Party or statewide, right? I think the petition actually showed that. But there is a significant percentage, and our estimation was that it was a majority of the Republican Party would vote out if it came down to it. But at the end of the day, what we showed was that there are people inside the Republican Party that believe that at a very minimum, we should have a debate and a vote on this issue. And so when you look at the reaction of the Chairman Tom Meckler on this issue, you have to understand one of two things. Either all of those things that he said about us being fringe, not existent, whatever, either he believed all of those things to be true, or he is a liar and the most evil man since Saddam Hussein. So, although there are some mustache comparisons, I'm sure there, but that's another story. The fact of the matter is that either way it goes, it was important for us to be able to pursue this issue, to organize, to give people a voice. And as surprised as he was, I think the people that were most surprised were the people that actually stood up in favor of a vote on Texas independence, because they learned the thing that we have gone around since the inception of the Texas nationalist movement and tried to convince the people of Texas, and that is you are not alone. The absolute, the electricity that was in the air, people were enthusiastic about this issue. They were ready to go. And when the chairman did what he did and made the very bad call that he made, you had about 15% of the delegation that got up and walked out of the convention over that decision, because they viewed it as essentially suppressing the voice of the people of the party. So look, regardless of whether we got it on the platform, that's not the relevant thing here. The relevant thing is that we now have the momentum going into the legislative session, and we could get legislation and a vote on Texas independence out of this next session. And understand this, that nothing is going to happen between now and the early filing in November that is going to dampen the passions of the people of Texas on the issue of independence. More and more, and we saw it in light of what has transpired in Orlando and the narrative coming out of the federal government about gun confiscation and gun limitations, is we're seeing more and more of a clamor on the part of Texans to say, you know what, I get it, it took me a while, but I understand we're going to be better off out. So, yes, sir.
Suppose you're down the road a while, you had your referendum. People in Texas have said, we want to secede.
Right.
The Texas legislature goes along with it. Why would Massachusetts and Arkansas and those people those states let us go when we're their sugar daddy? And number two, constitutionally, where is it that you can succeed? We tried one time before, you know.
You can. People's convention.
Well, we actually did it. We actually did it twice before, and right now we're at a 500 batting average. So, you know, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But let's get down to it. Let me take the second part of it first, which is the constitutional question. If you believe that any state leaving the Union is unconstitutional, you would have to point out where it is in the Constitution that forbids that. There are limitations placed inside the Constitution on what state governments can do, but the Constitution is absolutely silent on the issue, which means that if the Constitution is silent, then because of the 10th Amendment, it is a power that is reserved to the states. And so then you invoke Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution, which was passed after the Civil War, right? So take that off the table. Article 1, Section 2, which says all political powers inherent in the people, and the people have the inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish their form of government in such manner as they may think expedient. So we're definitely within our constitutional rights, and even if you want to take it to a modern, say, 20 to 21st century perspective on it, by virtue of the fact of the Supreme Court case of Missouri v. Holland, which happened in the early 1900s, which essentially said that treaty law is the law of the land, right? They sign on to a treaty, that treaty is enforceable even down to the state level. The fact that, strangely enough, and I can't believe I'm even going to invoke this, but the fact that the federal government signed the United Nations Treaty, and the fact that the United Nations Treaty recognizes and says that all members must abide by the right of self-determination for all peoples, means that not only would the federal government be wrong, illegal, unconstitutional, whatever you want to call it, to prevent us from having a referendum and determining how we want to govern ourselves, a Texan, if you will, but the state government, were they to stand in our way, would also be in violation of that. So there are a lot of different reasons for that. So that brings me to the first, and to be honest with you, the constitutional aspect of it is something that I guarantee will be debated ad nauseum. That I guarantee you, at some point, somewhere right now, in this wide world, someone is invoking the Supreme Court case of Texas versus White in some argument somewhere. They are probably extraordinarily thankful they are not here invoking it in front of me, but that's another story. But why would Massachusetts and those guys allow it? Well, let's get down to it. It's not theirs to allow. If we look at Article 1,
You said peaceful.
Exactly.
So peaceful means that the Congress would have to vote on it.
No.
Congress has no say. You would have to point to some mechanism in law that would give Congress a say in the matter, and they do not. Where people point to, oftentimes, is Texas versus White. And we can go down that road if you'd like. I mean, it's really kind of boring for people, but we can attack that. But I want to get back to the fundamental question. You look at Article 1, Section 1 of the Texas Constitution. Not only does it start with the words, Texas is a free and independent state, but it ends with the words that the perpetuity of the Union depends on the preservation of the right of local self-government. Okay? Article 1, Section 1 is abundantly clear, is that at the moment that the right of local self-government is impaired, then the Union is done. So I think there is very clear evidence, not just in those places. I mean, there's an overwhelming amount, but I think that's some of the kind of immediate things that we can talk about.
I understand where your argument's coming
Right.
from. What I don't understand is where you think that they're going to allow that.
It doesn't.
How do they disallow?
Peacefully allow it.
how do they disallow it?
Well, the house.
Well, you got the
against itself
executive,
can't
you
stand.
have the
Remember that?
executive, excuse me, you have the executive branch that's not gonna allow it.
So let me just throw this out there, because this strangely enough ties into the whole debate about Brexit. Those are sort of the same tactics that were used, some of the same argumentation about that. As a matter of fact, those threats are happening now. Now, they center around the economics of the situation, right? Where there will be retaliation if you go down this route. But the fact of the matter is that as Texans, we're not going to be bullied by bureaucrats. Let's get down to some statistics, okay? Essentially, what you're trying to do is say that there would potentially be some military intervention. They would declare us a state in rebellion, and they would send in the military to tamp it down. So I want to just run through the scenario for you, just so we all understand. The Texas legislature passes a piece of legislation that says the people of Texas are going to go to the polls and they're going to vote. They're going to invoke Article 1, Section 2 and Article 1, Section 1 of their Constitution and the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. We're going to invoke those rights, and the people of Texas are going to go to the polls and vote on whether they want to stay as part of the American Union, right, the United States of America, or they want to reassert their status as an independent, self-governing republic. And so the people of Texas, after a healthy debate, very public debate, go to the polls and they cast their vote. And the vote is cast and it comes back in favor of exit, right? We want to go. And so we start this process from there where we go to the federal government and we say, the people have spoken, we have a mandate, this is what our people have decided, now we got to deal with some things. Like any amicable divorce, we got to deal with assets and kids and property. So we're going to have that conversation. So then the federal government says, absolutely not. I understand that millions of people in Texas went to the polls and voted for this. I understand that it was broadcast absolutely around the world, that you guys had plenty of debate on it. But what we're going to do in retaliation is we're going to call up the military and we're going to go ahead and declare your entire state in rebellion, and we're going to essentially have a military junta in Austin. Okay? That's the scenario that people lay out when they talk about this military intervention. So then you have to determine what the domino effect of that would be. And the domino effect of that would be worldwide outrage, states that are philosophically similar to us viewing that as an encroachment upon the sovereign rights of the sovereign state of Texas, an affront to the rights of the people to determine how they are governed. And then there wouldn't just be one less flag, one less star on the flag, there would be a lot of others. I would venture a guess and say that Oklahoma would probably become the largest county in Texas. Let's start with that. But at the end of the day, what you're looking at is they don't have any room to move. When half of the military already say that the people in any state have an absolute 100% right to peacefully withdraw from the Union, they're already behind the 8 ball. How are they going to determine who those people are? You know, and I shared the story the last time I was here to try to allay fears from a gentleman who, strangely enough, was sitting there across from where Keith is right now. He would not come down off of his thought or ability that we were trying to start a second civil war. But while we were on the tour last summer, I met a gentleman who was a retired officer out of the United States Army, and had a similar situation with a young man who was having wrestling with those same feelings. And essentially, this Army officer who had just retired after, I think, 22 years in the Army, he said, look, he said, I'm going to tell you, he said, these conversations have been had, and if that order ever came down from Washington, D.C. to militarily attack a state that had peacefully chosen that they wanted to go down a different road, one of two things would happen. Number one is the military would arrest the person, probably the commander-in-chief who gave the order, or number two, it would split from the enlisted all the way up to the general staff, and they wouldn't be able to deliver bottled water. So, as he said, young man, that is nothing for you to fear. We are witnessing, and I think this is why it's important, why Scotland was important to us, and why this UK vote is extremely important to us, is those things don't come up Nobody suggested that if the UK withdrew from the EU, that NATO would come in and level London to the ground. And when the Scottish people, which strangely enough have been in their United Kingdom for much longer than we've been in the United States, when they had their vote, when they had their referendum and their debate, not once was it ever suggested that the British military would come in and bomb Edinburgh into rubble. So, you know, either we live under a government that is more heinous than the ruler of North Korea, or we live in a modern republic. Yes, sir.
You said that if the people of Texas overwhelmingly voted to withdraw, that what would they do? They wouldn't go against the will of the people. Talk about the federal government. Well, they've proven that over and over again they'll do that. Obamacare is a prime example.
Right.
70% of the people were against Obamacare. But the heck with it, they went ahead and passed it. And I'm just being devil's advocate here. I'm not
That's
against
fine.
this whole thing. I think we'd be so much better off. But
You might find it odd to understand that I actually agree with you in that regard.
what?
That we would be much better off.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I know it may be shocking.
I just see, you know, I could see the people of Texas vote to secede.
Right.
I could even see the pressure put on the Texas legislature. I just don't see how past that point there'd be a peaceful.
They can't.
But again, well, this is again why, and look, I personally have caught a lot of flack for spending so much time and public effort on the issue of Scotland and the UK and even some of the other smaller ones. But those things, the bigger they are, the more orderly they are, right? The more public they are, only help to serve our case. Because look, the people in the rest of the states, let's be honest. If Texas voted to leave, the other people in a 100% number are not going to want to keep us, right? 100% of the people over there don't want us to stay in, right? As a matter of fact, if you'd like to take a look at my email box sometime, I can send you some emails from some people who would rather spit us out of here like bad food.
We definitely marched a different beat.
Right. So the fact of the matter, but understand, just like there is this domino effect with the UK and Brexit, this domino effect, I think, is one here. And look, what we're talking about here is, even if you're not like me, right, that you don't agree that we'd be better off, if you believe that anybody who believes that we would be better off inside the union, at the very least, you can agree that it's time that we had a very vigorous and healthy debate on what the contribution is of the federal government in our daily lives. I don't know that we I don't know that we shouldn't have that conversation. I don't know that anyone with any sort of honesty can argue against that point, that we should not at least have the discussion and a serious reexamination, because I don't believe, look, when only 2% of the people, according to a survey that was held, I think like 6 months ago, only 2% of the people believe that the federal government is fixable. 2%. It's past time to have these conversations. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to comment that if you watch social media and see what they have to say, I think our biggest problem is going to be the number of people coming from other states, because I consistently see people say, and they're serious, if Texas does that, I'm headed for Texas. I'm going to Texas. And I think we're going to have this huge influx of people from the other states. I mean, huge
I'll
influx.
give you my response, or I'll give you Kara's response, because she answers the phone. So I'm going to let you choose. Which one would you like, my response, or would you like Kara's response?
Oh, that's tough.
Karen's.
Let's do Kara's.
Yeah.
Trust me, there will be enough people moving out to go to those socialist paradises that housing and jobs will not be a problem. I actually heard her tell someone that on the phone.
I love it. That's true.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I view this group as family, I will share something that was explained to me about a year ago. I asked a question of a Delta Force general. if Texas were to secede, where would y'all stand? He said, we'll seal the borders that quick. Nobody will get in or get out. The reason they've taken their position, their headquarters is in South Texas.
So take that, snowbirds.
But we want them to get out.
No, I'm just
If
saying.
they want to get out, we want them to
He
go.
said, we'll seal the borders, and nobody from the military will ever come in this state.
That's
We
what
will
they're
make sure of
talking
that.
Oh, military, okay.
Yeah, there'll be nobody coming across the
Outside the state of
borders
Texas.
militarily. And it doesn't take very many of those fellows to get the job done.
Give me just one second, Dave. We'll get Jeff real quick. because he's-
Hey, I just give you the opportunity to talk about, I mean, Texas solution for Texas challenges, that's great, but I think a lot of people would like to know all the positives that would be the result
Yes, that
of
is.
self-determination.
Absolutely. Look, the argument, and while, because we're talking about the Brexit idea, and really it's how it informs what we're doing here in Texas, and while that is largely a negative argument, right? There's a lot of negative argumentation, and we fall into that as well. But understand that there are a tremendous amount of positives that come from this. Look, self-government for us means that we get to implement immigration and border controls that are sensible. You know, let's be honest. If Texans were in charge of border issues and issues of immigration, would we have had what transpired in Orlando?
No.
Would it have happened?
I don't
No.
believe it.
I don't know that any of us with any absolute certainty can say that it would not have happened, but I can guarantee you that the 80 other plots that have been, that have taken place since 9/11, that number would be significantly smaller. You know, you have to understand that illegal immigration blows a $12 billion hole in the Texas economy every single solitary year. 12 billion with a B. Now let me tell you, because I started this off talking about that I've been here 3 times. The first time that I came here to speak, that figure was at $9 billion a year. So there are some extreme positives, and I'll give you a good example, and I'll put it in the entire Brexit argument, right? One of the things that people say about Texas all the time is that there's absolutely no way that Texas could make it on its own. Now, most people say that are non-Texans, probably not anybody in this room, but strangely enough, I actually hear it. They say that we are not big enough economically, and that all of our economic prosperity flows from the mouth and the pen of the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. So they predict a financial apocalypse. Well, guess what? That's the same thing that's being used against the UK in the Brexit debate. The Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, has gotten up publicly, and one of the things that I thought was interesting that he predicted was World War III if they left, which I think that's a little excessive. But the other was the Great Brexit Global Recession. Okay, so this economic argument, but the Brexiteers, right, the pro-leave side, point to an example of a country that sits squarely in the middle of Europe that is not a member of the European Union. And that country is Switzerland. Switzerland is one of the highest exporting countries out of Europe. They are arguably the richest and most prosperous country. And I'll have to tell you that I had a speaking engagement in Houston several weeks back. And an investment banker looked at me and said, you know, when people realize that Texas leaving the Union will make us rich like Switzerland or Monaco, they'll knock the doors down at the polling place to vote out. Okay, that's what happens. What happens when you eliminate 175,000 pages of excessive regulation? What happens? What happens to your economy when you eliminate the overregulation? And what is interesting about it, to put it in a historical context, and I would just suggest, if you guys want a quick primer on it, go watch Brexit the movie. It's on YouTube. But one of the things is that what spurred on the German miracle post-World War II was the guy that they put in charge of their financial recovery, and the first thing that he did was he repealed virtually all economic regulations that were written under the Third Reich. And the German miracle happened. And in contrast, what happened with the UK was they kept their wartime economy with centralized planning and control and rationing and regulation. Everything that you could imagine from a business standpoint had some regulation about it and had some bureaucrat to oversee it. And that's why they, by 1973, were called the sick man of Europe. Their economy was in a shambles. So rather than go down that path that gave Germany its prosperity, the EU has adopted the Washington, D.C. mindset, that if it sits still long enough, it must have a regulation written to control how long it sits there and when it must move. Okay, David, sorry.
I was gonna say that staying in the Union in its original form as it written, as the founders had written it, is a great, wonderful thing. But
Right.
the problem is, like I said, we all have noticed and we see people that are paying attention, is they're not abiding by that contract any longer.
Exactly.
Therefore, being that, you have to do something.
Well, and I think this gets down to sort of the relationship of Texas and the rest of the states, you know, and that's why you'll hear me a lot of times couch it that way. You know, obviously, this is the political class against, that thinks they know what's best for all of us versus the ordinary people who we absolutely know we know what's the best. It's the bureaucracy versus the freedom lovers, and some want to couch it as the United States against Texas. I mean, I've been called un-American so many times. People probably think I have an ISIS flag flying outside of my house. But the fact of the matter is there's nothing about America that I don't like. It's the Union, this political and economic behemoth and monstrosity that has become the problem. And what you said is essentially one of the arguments that's being made in Europe right now, which is, look, let's leave, right? Let's abandon this idea of a totally integrated political and economic union, and then let's work together, let's cooperate together, let's be friends on our terms. Let's not be tied and bound to something that is going to end in disaster for all of us, but as Britons, let us negotiate how we interact with one another. And I think that's the same thing that we've got to talk about here. You know, this fear-mongering that happens, I've seen it so many times before. This fear-mongering here. Well, what are you going to do when they embargo you? They're not going to embargo us. They want to trade with us. Why? Because we make stuff. They want stuff. We will sell them stuff, and they will gladly pay for it. Right? We trade. We can trade with 200 other countries around the world, and we can do it on our terms. Right? Instead of these horrible free trade agreements that get shoved down our throat from bureaucrats and multinational corporations that only serve to feed the bureaucracy and stifle innovation and growth here. Texas gets it right on economics 100% of the time.
What's this